The morning show studio had barely begun to stir awake when the atmosphere shifted. It wasn't obvious at first, a subtle change, something quiet and almost invisible. Cameras were being prepped, screens tested, lights adjusted. But among the commotion, both Kelly Rihanna and Mark Canulis sensed a different kind of weight lingering in the air. It wasn't the usual pre-show nerves or production chaos. It was something deeply human. The previous day had left a mark across the entertainment world. Ryan Seacrest, a longtime friend to both Kelly and Mark, and a familiar voice to millions, had grown unexpectedly emotional on his radio show. What was meant to be a short, earnest reflection transformed into a moment of vulnerability, raw enough that listeners everywhere paused what they were doing. Though Ryan had always been composed, always polished, always steady no matter what life demanded of him, something inside him had finally overflowed. His voice cracked as he spoke about his father's struggle with a long-term illness, and as he tried to continue, the emotions simply overtook him. It wasn't scripted, it wasn't planned, it was real. And the world felt it. Kelly had watched the clip late that night, sitting quietly in her living room. She didn't watch as a former co-host, she watched as a friend. The tremble in Ryan's voice, the long pauses, the way he pressed his hand against his eyes as though trying to push the ache inward where no one could see it. She felt her own throat tighten. She had known him for years, his humor, his discipline, his warmth, his almost uncanny ability to glide through stressful moments. She knew how rarely he allowed himself to break. That made the moment even more striking. So when Kelly stepped onto the set the next morning, she didn't hesitate. She knew this was one of those times where humanity mattered more than headlines. As the broadcast began, she looked directly into the camera, her composure calm, but her voice soft with sincerity. "We want to send love this morning, to someone who has always given so much strength to others," she said gently. "Ryan, we're thinking of you and your family. We're with you." Beside her, Mark nodded with quiet emphasis. "Love you, brother," he added simply. "We're here." There was no dramatization, no heightened emotion for effect, just an honest moment of connection. But what viewers didn't know was how the story began long before that broadcast. Ryan had carried the weight of his father's illness privately. His father, a man he had long admired, strong, intelligent, resilient, had been facing challenges that had shaken the entire family. Although the family preferred quiet strength over public attention, the emotional toll eventually bled into Ryan's voice on air. That day on his radio show had started lighthearted enough. He was speaking about gratitude, family, the small things that ground us, and then, gradually, the conversation turned toward his father. He mentioned almost in passing the difficult months his family had endured, the long nights, the uncertainty, how he had flown across states to be with them during especially challenging moments, how decisions had weighed heavily on everyone. And then he paused. The silence stretched. Listeners could hear him inhale sharply, as if forcing himself to continue. When he did, his voice cracked. I got a picture from them last night. A simple picture. My parents out by the shoreline, just sitting by the water, smiling. Another long pause. Then his voice broke entirely. What followed was not a breakdown, it was a breakthrough. The kind of emotional honesty that rarely surfaces in front of microphones. Back in her home, Kelly had seen enough to understand all the things he didn't say out loud. She knew the emotional strain of caring for aging or ill family members, the constant back and forth between wanting to stay strong and wanting to collapse, the effort to preserve normalcy while navigating fear, the way guilt creeps in when you're working instead of watching over them, how your heart pulls you in two places at once. She had lived that balancing act for years, television schedules, family responsibilities, her own private worries that never made it onto the screen. And because she knew that struggle so well, she recognized every trembling breath in Ryan's voice. So she reached out. First, privately, with a heartfelt message that required no performance. She reminded him he didn't need to carry everything alone. She told him his strength didn't depend on staying stoic. She offered comfort. Not as a co-star, not as a colleague from the entertainment world, but as someone who genuinely cared. And when she spoke publicly later, it wasn't to draw attention, it was to offer solidarity. Behind the scenes, Ryan was still trying to manage everything on his plate. Live shows, national events, multiple hosting roles. For years, he had mastered the art of professionalism, but life doesn't abide by broadcast schedules, and some emotional weights are too heavy to conceal forever. He had spent more time with his family recently, focusing on presence rather than productivity. Those moments of togetherness, quiet dinners, shared walks, moments of laughter despite fear, became increasingly valuable. They reminded him of who he was before the nonstop demands of television. His father's journey was still unfolding, but the support that poured in from friends and listeners helped strengthen the family's resolve. People from all over the country sent stories of resilience, caregiving, long-term illness, late-night worries, and learning to stay strong in the face of uncertainty. Many messages sounded like echoes of Ryan's own feelings. He later spoke softly on his radio show, thanking listeners for their kindness. He told them, "You reminded me I'm not the only one going through something like this. Your messages meant more than you know." Meanwhile, the bond between Kelly and Ryan quietly reaffirmed itself. Their friendship had formed naturally during their years sharing a morning show desk, teasing each other, supporting one another through the chaos of live television. Even after he left the show, they kept in touch, their dynamic unchanged by distance. For viewers, moments like this reminded them why the duo's chemistry felt so genuine on screen. Behind the laughter and jokes was a friendship built on empathy and trust. Kelly's message to him, both private and public, carried the warmth of that bond. She never made a spectacle of his vulnerability. She simply showed up, the way friends do. In the entertainment world, where relationships often fade the moment a contract ends, theirs endured. As the weeks progressed, Ryan stayed focused on what mattered most: his father, his mother, his siblings, and the strength they found in one another. There were challenging days and hopeful days, but there was always love and support and gratitude. He also kept doing what he did best, using his voice to bring people together. Many listeners said they found comfort in hearing him talk honestly about the emotional struggles families face. His authenticity created a sense of community among people who had felt alone in their own battles. And when he spoke about his father again weeks later, it was with a steadier voice. "We're taking it one day at a time," he said. "And we're surrounded by love." Kelly continued checking in regularly, not for publicity, but simply because she cared. Sometimes the messages were short, sometimes they were long, sometimes they were just a reminder that he wasn't facing things alone. And through it all, their friendship stayed intact, strengthened even more by the vulnerability Ryan allowed the world to witness. The entertainment industry can be a place of polished illusion, perfect lighting, perfected lines, carefully crafted moments. But this wasn't any of that. This was real life, with all of its beauty and its difficulty. A son doing everything he could to remain strong for his father, who first taught him what strength truly meant.